You're listening to Beyond the Couch podcast with Dr. Sally Nazari, where we look at you beyond the couch and build ways to enrich your life, share your triumphs, achieve your goals, and most importantly, where we'll be celebrating you. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Couch podcast. I'm your host, licensed clinical psychologist, Dr. Sally Nazari, and I'm looking forward to talking today about anxiety. Our goal here is to understand what anxiety is and how it shows up in our lives. Next week, we'll go through some strategies for navigating and managing anxiety. So let's get started. Research conducted by the National Institute of Mental Health has shown that anxiety disorders are the number one mental health problem among American women and are second only to alcohol and drug abuse among men. In fact, approximately 10% of the population of the U.S. has suffered from an anxiety disorder in the past year. Some questions have been raised about why problems with anxiety have been so prevalent. And one school of thought is that anxiety disorders are an outcome of cumulative stress acting over time. While there are numerous factors which cause a person to develop anxiety disorders, stress plays a key role. In fact, people living in Western society are currently experiencing more stress than they have at any previous time in history, and it's this stress which helps to account for the increased incidence of anxiety disorders. Now, it can be argued that human beings have always had to deal with stressful societal conditions such as wars, famines, plagues, economic depression, and so on. There are some reasons to suggest that the overall stress level is higher now than before. One reason is that our environment and social order have changed more in the last few decades than they have in the previous 300 years. The increased pace of modern society and the increased rate of technological change have deprived people of adequate time to adjust to these situations. A factor such as this makes it difficult for many individuals in our modern society to experience a sense of stability or consistency in their lives. Anxiety disorders are simply one outcome of a diminished ability to cope with the resulting stress, as are addictive disorders, depression, and the increased incidence of degenerative diseases. Let's take a look now at the nature of anxiety itself. We can better understand the nature of anxiety by looking both at what it is and what it is not. For example, anxiety can be distinguished from fear in several ways. When you're afraid, your fear is usually directed toward some concrete, external object or situation. The event that you fear usually is within the bounds of possibility. You might fear not meeting a deadline, being unable to pay your bills, or being rejected by someone you want to impress. When you experience anxiety, on the other hand, you often can't specify what it is you're anxious about. The focus of anxiety is more internal than external. It seems to be a response to a vague, distant, or even unrecognized danger. You might be anxious about losing control of yourself or some situation, or you might feel a vague anxiety about just something bad happening. It's important to understand that anxiety affects your whole being. It's a physiological, behavioral, and psychological reaction all at once. On a physiological level, anxiety may include bodily reactions such as rapid heartbeat, muscle tension, queasiness, dry mouth, or sweating. On a behavioral level, it can sabotage our ability to act, express ourselves, or deal with certain everyday situations and just freeze up. Psychologically, anxiety is a subjective state of apprehension and uneasiness. In its most extreme form, it can cause you to feel detached from yourself and even fearful of dying or going crazy. The fact that anxiety can affect you on a physiological, behavioral, and psychological level has important implications for our attempts to recover, which we'll discuss in more depth next week. Anxiety can appear in different forms and at different levels of intensity. It can range in severity from a mere twinge of uneasiness to a full-blown panic attack, marked by heart palpitations, disorientation, and terror. Anxiety that's not connected with any particular situation, that seems to come out of the blue, is called free-floating anxiety, or in more severe situations, a spontaneous panic attack. The difference between an episode of free-floating anxiety and a spontaneous panic attack can be defined by whether we experience 4 or more of the following symptoms at the same time: shortness of breath, heart palpitations or rapid, irregular heartbeat, trembling or shaking, sweating, choking, nausea or abdominal distress, numbness, dizziness or unsteadiness, feeling of detachment or being out of touch with yourself, hot flashes or chills, fear of dying, and a fear of going crazy or out of control. Now, if your anxiety arises only in response to a specific situation, it's called situational anxiety or phobic anxiety. Situational anxiety is different from everyday fear in that it tends to be out of proportion or unrealistic. If you have a disproportionate apprehension about driving on freeways, going to the doctor, or confronting your spouse, this may qualify as situational anxiety. Situational anxiety becomes phobic when you actually start to avoid the situation. For instance, if you give up driving on freeways, going to doctors, or confronting your spouse altogether. In other words, phobic anxiety is situational anxiety that includes persistent avoidance of the situation. Often, anxiety can be brought on merely by thinking about a particular situation. When you feel distressed about what might happen when or if you have to face one of your phobic situations, you're experiencing what's called anticipatory anxiety. In its milder forms, anticipatory anxiety is indistinguishable from ordinary worrying. But sometimes anticipatory anxiety becomes intense enough to be called anticipatory panic. There is an important difference between spontaneous anxiety or panic and anticipatory anxiety or panic. Spontaneous anxiety tends to come out of the blue, peaks to a high level very rapidly, and then subsides gradually. The peak is usually reached within 5 minutes, followed by a gradual tapering off period of an hour or more. Anticipatory anxiety, on the other hand, tends to build up more gradually in response to encountering or simply thinking about a threatening situation, and then usually falls off quickly. You may end up worrying yourself into a frenzy about something for an hour or more, and then let go of the worry as you find something else to occupy your mind. Anxiety is an inevitable part of life in contemporary society. It's important to realize that there are many situations that come up in everyday life in which it's appropriate and reasonable to react with some anxiety. In fact, if you didn't feel any anxiety in response to everyday challenges involving potential loss or failure, I might be concerned. But let's be clear. Anxiety disorders are distinguished from everyday normal anxiety in a couple of different ways. 1. Anxiety is more intense. 2. It tends to last longer. For example, anxiety that may persist for months instead of going away after a stressful situation has passed. And 3. Anxiety leads to phobias that interfere with your life. If you're dealing with an anxiety disorder, you're likely to be concerned with the causes of your problem. You probably ask yourself, why do I have anxiety? Is it something hereditary, or is it the way I was brought up? The symptoms of anxiety disorders often seem irrational and inexplicable. It's only natural to raise the question, why? But before considering in detail the various causes of anxiety disorders, there are 2 general points you should bear in mind. First, although learning about the causes of anxiety disorders can give you insight into how these problems develop, this knowledge is not necessary to overcome your particular challenge with anxiety. Second, be wary of the notion that there's one primary cause or type of cause for an anxiety disorder. Regardless of the type of anxiety you're dealing with, there is no one cause which, if removed, would eliminate the problem. Anxiety problems are brought about by a variety of causes operating on numerous different levels. These levels include heredity, biology, family background and upbringing, conditioning, recent stressors, your self-talk and personal belief system, your ability to express feelings. Now, the exciting news in that is that we have many different avenues in which we can intervene to help you manage, navigate, and decrease your anxiety levels. I do look forward to sharing some of that in next week's episode. In the meantime, I hope that you've learned quite a bit about anxiety and have learned to understand a little bit more about how it may be affecting you. Until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Couch Podcast, a space for celebrating you. The contents of this episode are for informational and supplemental purposes only, and not a substitute for professional services. For more access to You Beyond the Couch, check out www.drsallynazari.com.